What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Tuesday, January 13th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 5-game NBA slate tonight starting at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. 4 games starting at 8. 1 game, the Suns and the Heat, starting at 7:30. Going to go through game by game. This is my first look at the slate. We'll talk about each game, what plays look good to me, what I'd be playing if the slate started right now with the information that we have available. As always, be sure to jump in our Discord, use our projections. Link for both of those are in the description below. Our projections are now live. You can use the promo code RTSNBA to get 20% off of your first payment as well. We have an annual package that is 365 days, so not through the end of the season. If you use that promo code, it's 20% off for essentially the next year. So check those out. And the Discord is free. You can hop in there, talk NBA, whatever. We have an NBA channel in that Discord. So as always, there's a lot of moving parts throughout the day. Feel free to jump in there. We are going to start with Miami taking on Phoenix in Miami. About a 115 total for the Heat, 114 for Phoenix. In Miami. So starting with Miami and Phoenix, taking a quick look at the injury report there. Norman Powell is questionable for the Heat. That obviously matters a lot. High usage guy. So if he's out, not only are you opening up minutes, but you are also opening up usage. Pelle Larsson and Tyler Hero are both listed as available. For Phoenix, Jalen Green remains out. Jordan Goodwin is available. No Q tags there. So the only thing that we have to keep an eye on is Norm Powell. For now, we have him projected in. So right now operating with the assumption that he is good to go. But starting on the Phoenix side, where you do have essentially a healthy Phoenix team, 22% projected ownership coming in to Mark Williams. He's still inexpensive at center, good point per minute guy, only $5,500. And one thing that I'd pointed out on a show, I don't know, last month when I was briefly doing shows, was there's absolutely a tendency for anybody that has followed the NBA and played DFS for any period of time to just like habitually fall into, I think, oh, Miami's a shitty matchup. It's not appealing, because they're kind of just always that like grinded out good defensive team. And they've been very, very good defensively again this year. They're third in adjusted defensive rating, but they've actually played at the fastest pace in the NBA so far this season. They have a couple possession lead on Atlanta for second. So that is a big change, something that definitely takes some getting used to when you're just, thinking about matchups. So that is something to keep in mind with Phoenix here. It is a shitty matchup as far as on a per possession basis, but at least Miami is actually giving you additional possessions now. It's a pace up spot for every team in the NBA. So that is working, in Phoenix's favor, but it's really the price tag on Mark Williams that stands out. Again, it's not that it's a really appealing matchup overall or anything like that, but it's that you're getting somebody projected for, we have him at about 25 minutes. That is a very good point per minute guy. So far this season, 1.18 DraftKings points per minute, 18.5% rebounding percentage, 17% usage rate. That price tag just hasn't adjusted enough. And there is a path to him playing more than those 25 or so minutes as well. Obviously plenty of upside there also. I'm getting to about 25% of him, so that puts me pretty close to the field. As far as the rest of Phoenix, they're just one of those teams where they're fully healthy. They're like kind of all getting 5 to 10% ownership from the field. Devin Booker getting about 6%, Dylan Brooks getting 24%. I didn't see that. Brooks getting 24%. I only have 11. Dylan Brooks has taken a large step forward as a fantasy asset so far this year, scoring at a higher rate, averaging 1 fantasy point per minute, 28.7% usage rate for Dylan Brooks is second highest on the team behind Devin Booker. So you are seeing a completely different Dylan Brooks than you saw, during most of his time in Memphis. And I think we're far enough into the year that, the sticker shock is probably worn off for people, and people are just willing to pay $6,100 for Dylan Brooks. I do think that he's fine. I think that there are plenty of other pieces in that range that you can get to if you want to save some ownership. So right now I'm getting about half the field on Brooks. But again, I think he looks fine. He's just somebody that I do think is relatively interchangeable with other pieces on the slate. Beyond the Brooks and Williams, nobody getting above 10% ownership. Jordan Goodwin getting about 10. You're getting like 5 to 7 on O'Neal, Ryan Dunn, Iguodaro, Devin Booker, Colin Gillespie, Grayson Allen. Basically, the entire rest of the team just looks like secondary plays. The one thing that I will point out here, though, is I am actually getting a bit of a stand on Devin Booker. I have about 16% of him at about 6% projected ownership. So it's not going to, break my night if he does poorly. But I do like the idea of just getting overweight on a low-owned, reasonably priced $8,700 Devin Booker. You know the upside that he gives you if his shot is falling. Obviously a very good offensive player. 1.22 DraftKings points per minute this year, 31% usage rate, 30% assist percentage is also the highest on the team. You've seen kind of over the years there have been times where you get point Booker, but now essentially it's Booker running the show entirely, both in terms of usage and assist percentage. So there is a very high ceiling for him. Again, it's a difficult matchup against Miami. It's likely that Spoelstra, has a good game plan to make life difficult for Devin Booker. It's not something that I think works out all that often, but when it does, it's 5% on Devin Booker on a 5-game slate. That's going to be somewhat appealing. Beyond that, I'm not getting to too much of Phoenix. I'm pretty much similar to the field, 9% Royce O'Neal, 6 to 7% apiece on Dunn, Allen, Iguodaro, like 3% on Goodwin and Gillespie. So basically for Phoenix, I think that in terms of like point per dollar plays, the priorities here are Williams and Brooks, but I'm pretty much matching the field on Williams, and I'm getting over the field on Booker, where I think you're just going to see the field prefer some other pay up options, which obviously is fine. A lot of things will change, of course, between now and lock as well as we get more injury news. Moving over to the Miami side, nobody here getting a ton of ownership. Norm Powell's projected for about 10%. That's the high mark. You have 5 to 6% coming into Bam Adebayo, Davion Mitchell, sub 5% to Tyler Hero and everyone else. And for the most part, I'm not getting too much of Miami either. I have 14% Norman Powell. I have 10% Tyler Hero. So Hero kind of similar to Devin Booker, where I'm not getting a ton. If he has a shitty game, I'm going to be fine. But if he does have a good game, I am a bit over the field, just liking the upside that he does offer here. I think it's kind of an interesting idea, not that you have to, certainly, but with it being a 5-game slate, like the idea of pairing a low-owned Devin Booker and Tyler Hero is pretty interesting as well. I'm looking to see if I got any of that. Doesn't look like I have an easy way to tell, so I'm not sure. But again, not that you have to, but you do get some correlation there where, if this game is higher scoring than expected, if it does stay close, it's super competitive. Maybe you get Hero versus Booker, down the stretch. Now, if Norm Powell is out, you will probably see ownership pretty much across the board on Miami increase. Overall this season, Norman Powell, 1.16 DraftKings points per minute. Bam is at 1.19. Hero is at 1.14. Andrew Wiggins has played the most minutes on the team. He's at 0.98. Davion Mitchell's at 0.86. Like a bunch of just, solid point per minute guys. If you take Norman Powell off the floor, not only do you get increased minutes, but you're taking a 28% usage rate off of the floor. That is the highest usage rate on the team. So it will open up some other stuff. Loading right now the data without him on the floor, but I would expect that you see, more ownership coming into pretty much all parts of Miami. Without him on the floor, Wiggins still a fantasy point per minute guy. Hero at 1.2. His usage rate jumps to 29%. So you see a nice bump there. Bam gets up to 1.2 DraftKings points per minute. He has a 24.5% usage rate without Powell on the floor. So definitely a spot to pay attention to. You're going to need to keep an eye on the status of Norman Powell. As far as defensive efficiency goes, Phoenix has been a top 10 defensive unit this year. They are currently ranked 8th. They have also played at a very slow pace. Very might be overstating it. They played at the 11th fastest pace, but they're like lumped in with a bunch of teams. They're in the bottom half of the league in pace, top half of the league in defensive rating. So not the most appealing matchup. But again, if you take Powell out, it will make Miami look a bit more appealing. If Powell is in, again, I do just kind of like the idea of if you are going to, whether it's Hero or Bam or Powell, like maybe use those guys a little bit more frequently in the lineups where you have, say, Devin Booker, just because you do get some correlation there amongst relatively low-owned plays. Denver taking on the Pelicans in New Orleans, about a 116 total for the Pels, about 117 for Denver. We do have injury news in this one that hopefully we will have by the time this slate starts. Q tag on Jamal Murray is obviously very, very big. Aaron Gordon is probable. Spencer Jones is probable. Christian Brown has already been ruled out. Cam Johnson remains out. Nikola Jokic remains out. Jonas Valanciunas remains out. So we still have this shorthanded Denver team. It's just a matter of exactly how shorthanded are they. And Jamal Murray, if he's in, is going to look like a very, very good play. He's going to look like a priority on this slate. If he's out, then you get the same sort of mess that we got in Denver's last game, where they offer a good amount of value and a couple of actual NBA level players. In the last game, we had a starting lineup of, I believe, Pickett, Tyson, Watson, Jones, and I don't even remember who the fifth guy was. Oh, Gordon. Was, I believe, the starting lineup last game. So that is a huge thing that we will need to keep an eye on. Right now, with Murray projected in, he's projected for about 40% ownership. Aaron Gordon getting about 31%. And then there's a bit of a drop off to Peyton Watson at around 15, Tim Hardaway at about 10, and then everybody else 5% or less. For me right now, Jamal Murray is my highest owned guy here. I have 31%. And then I'm getting to 21% Peyton Watson, which is a little bit above the field. I'm getting to 15% Aaron Gordon, which is a little bit below the field. But I think both of those guys are just, solid plays. Aaron Gordon in particular, like I said, I'm not getting as much as the field right now. But I do always think it's important to point out that Aaron Gordon is a much better and well-rounded basketball player than I think he gets credit for in DFS a lot of the time, because he's very infrequently been asked to carry the load. Especially playing in Denver where you have Jokic, you have Murray, but he is somebody that when needed, he can step up not only as a scorer, but as a playmaker. Obviously he can rebound. He is solid defensively. So he is somebody that you can potentially see a bigger delta in his point per minute production when he has to take on a bigger role than you see from some other players. He's played 145 minutes this season without Nikola Jokic on the floor. That's not accounting for whether Jamal Murray is on or off, but just without Nikola Jokic on the floor, 1.14 DraftKings points per minute for Gordon, 28% usage rate. For comparison, Jamal Murray in 396 minutes without Jokic is at 29%. So you're really seeing the offense run through the two of them. 17% assist percentage for Aaron Gordon, Jamal Murray at 44%. So that's where you see Murray, really differentiate from Aaron Gordon. But Gordon, essentially a secondary playmaker without Jokic out there. We probably don't have much of a sample size where Jokic and Murray are both off the floor, but I'll take a look anyway just to see what it does to Aaron Gordon's rates. But my point here is that if Jamal Murray is out, if Jamal Murray is in, Aaron Gordon looks good. But, there are just going to be plenty of mid-range plays you can filter between if you want to save some ownership. But if Jamal Murray is out, I think there's a very good chance that Aaron Gordon becomes a large priority for you. He has played only 73 minutes this year without Jokic or Murray on the floor, but 1.22 DraftKings points per minute. And what really stands out, 29, almost a 30% usage rate. So his usage has gone up a little bit, but mostly just he's maintained a very high usage rate. The assist percentage, though, in those 73 minutes without Murray or Jokic on the floor jumps all the way to 31%. It's actually slightly higher than Jalen Pickett's 29%. Peyton Watson gets up to about 19% as well. So what I was saying, is bear it out even in this small sample size of only 73 minutes, where Aaron Gordon really can see the entire offense run through him if Murray is not on the floor. If Murray is on the floor, you're still going to get a high usage Aaron Gordon, but certainly looks quite a bit better if Murray is out. Still looks very good if he's in. Similarly, for Peyton Watson, you have seen him take on a bigger role this year. 1.09 DraftKings points per minute in 156 minutes without either one of Jokic or Murray on the floor. He's played 407 minutes total without Jokic on the floor, not accounting for where Jamal Murray is at. He's at 0.93 DraftKings points per minute in those minutes. So I think Aaron Gordon is the higher projected, better play of the two. We actually have a little bit higher projection on Watson right now, but I would because of the minutes. So Gordon's the better point per minute guy. Watson probably plays more minutes. Watson's also more expensive. But I don't mind flipping them some in large field tournaments and just, hoping you get a bigger game from Peyton Watson than Aaron Gordon. But I would say that, like, if Murray gets ruled out, I think that becomes not that like it would make Watson worse, but the idea of getting away from Gordon becomes a lot scarier if Murray is out, just because you're going to get kind of like point Aaron Gordon to some extent. Beyond that, Bruce Brown right now getting about 6% ownership. I have 15%. He's 4,100, point guard, shooting guard eligible. It's not an exciting play. It's a play that probably falls off between now and lock, but with everything looking the way that it does right now, I don't mind using him as, some kind of cheap lineup filler. I don't have Tim Hardaway much right now. He's getting 10% ownership. So it seems like I'm kind of just getting to Brown in place of Hardaway at half the ownership, which I'm fine with. But, Hardaway I think looks fine as well. On the other side of this one for the Pelicans, Saddiq Bey is questionable. Jose Alvarado remains out. Herb Jones remains out. Murray out for the season. So we do need to keep an eye on Saddiq Bey's status. We have him projected in for about 28 minutes right now. If he's out, obviously it opens up some minutes on the wing. This is a team that I'm getting to a good amount of, and the field is there as well. 25% projected ownership coming into Derek Queen is the high mark. And then you're getting like 10 to 15% projected ownership to Yves Missi, Trey Murphy, Zion, Jeremiah Fears, and then about 6% to Saddiq Bey. I'm not all that different from the field. I am a little bit overweight on Missi. I have 23% right now. I'm around even with 22% Queen. Not too far over the field on Zion or Murphy, where I have 17 and 14%. I am about 2x on Saddiq Bey. And then Jeremiah Fears, I'm at about 8%, which is pretty close to the field as well. So nothing super interesting to say there with the Pelicans. I don't have any like crazy stands one way or the other. You do just, you're getting a lot of guys that are just solid point per minute players. Derek Queen has certainly been impressive so far in his rookie season. I do want to take a look at the Pelicans rotation just because we know that Denver's bench unit is always terrible. So if you can get, not that you want to like specifically necessarily target bench players that, are just backups, but if you do get guys that run with the second unit, in addition to playing regular minutes, that is something that you can potentially take advantage of. And for New Orleans rather, Zion is the most likely guy there. In their most recent game, started the second quarter and started the fourth quarter. So you should get some Zion against the bench minutes. Jordan Poole, like if you really wanted, in the $5 100K to first 70,000 entry contest, Jordan Poole coming off the bench against Denver's second unit at 5,900. Like I'm not getting to him. I don't think he's a great play, but he is at least a scorer with the second unit. But the guy amongst like the pieces that you are going to play from the Pels that you can expect to get those second unit minutes is Zion at 8,200. So that makes him look a little bit better. For point per minute production so far this season, Murphy's at 1.1 DraftKings points per minute. Fears is at about a fantasy point per minute. Queen's at 1.24. Bey is at about 1. Zion's at 1.3. Poole's at 0.95. Missi's at 0.93. Like all of these guys are good point per minute guys. It's just a matter of exactly how does their playing time shake out. Missi 3,300. Like that's a really, really cheap price tag. We only have him projected to play about 17 minutes. He played 18 in their last game. So it's not that you're expecting a ton of playing time from him, but he is somebody that, if Derek Queen gets in foul trouble, if Zion gets in foul trouble, if Zion gets hungry, if Zion rolls his ankle, like any of these things can lead to more minutes for Missi. And 3,300 is too cheap of a price tag for his range of outcomes. Like he probably should be 4K, 4,200, somewhere in there. So you do need some luck to break your way for Missi probably to have like a true tournament winning game, but 3,300, he is underpriced for, his current role. And then there are multiple ways that he can get more playing time. So I do like him at modest ownership as a value play in tournaments. Chicago taking on Houston in Houston. This is our first game that has a relatively wide spread, about a 118 total for Houston, about 107 for the Bulls. For Chicago, we have Julian Phillips downgraded to questionable. right before I started the show. Nothing super important there. Still no Josh Giddey, no Kobe White, no Zach Collins, no a bunch of other guys that are in the G League and don't matter. So you do still have this shorthanded Bulls team. For the Rockets, no Tari Eason once again, no Dorian Finney-Smith, of course, no Fred VanVleet. We had no Eason last game either, and you had Aaron Holiday get the start. So starting on the Chicago side here, 12% projected ownership coming into Trey Jones, about 10% to Ayo Dosunmu, 8% to Vooch and Herter, 5% or less, or 5% to Buzelis, about 2% to Okoro. Nobody else getting any. For me, I'm not getting to too much of Chicago here, and that is perfectly fine with me. The one guy that I am getting, I had a bunch of him the other day, helped me win a tournament, is Ayo Dosunmu. I'm about 2x the field there. About 10% ownership. I'm getting to 20%. He is only 5,300. He has the shooting guard, small forward eligibility. That is really nice. He's likely to play, upper 20s in minutes. Again, there is some blowout risk here, but he is a solid enough point per minute guy that at that price tag with that positional eligibility, I do still think he is a pretty useful piece, especially at pretty low ownership in tournaments. Beyond that, though, I'm only getting to about 8% of Herter and Vooch, which is in line with the field. 6% Buzelis is about the same as the field. I am below the field on Trey Jones. I only have 2%. He's coming in at 12. I don't feel strongly about that one. Like, he's perfectly fine. He's a fantasy point per minute guy, but also not super concerned about if I end up, below the field on a $5,700 Trey Jones. So for me, the only guy that I'm really over the field on here is Ayo Dosunmu. For the season, Dosunmu 0.97 DraftKings points per minute. He, again, is just only 5,300. I think he should probably be like, 5,800 or something like that. Houston on the other side, or Houston rather, I should say, defensively this year, 5th in adjusted defensive rating. They have played at the 3rd slowest pace in the league. Like, it is not a good matchup for Chicago either. If you do go to the Bulls, I do think it's an interesting spot to maybe pair them with guys on Houston, very similarly to how Utah and Cleveland worked out yesterday, where you got the really big game from Lauri Markkanen. You got a really big game from Keontae George. You got a really big game from Yusuf Nurkic. If you get that kind of thing from Chicago, whether it is Dosunmu or Vooch or Buzelis or Jones, whoever it is, it makes it more likely that this game does go down to the wire and that Houston has to play all their guys their full minutes. And as a result, basically, if you know for a fact going in that Nikola Vucevic scores 50 fantasy points, you would have a higher projection on Houston guys as well. So whenever you are going to, especially when you're talking about, like the double-digit underdog type teams, I do like the idea even more. I always like stacking within games, but even more so because the industry in general is just going to have a little bit lower minutes projections the wider the spread is. And so the marginal benefit to that game stack can actually be a little bit higher because, for example, let's say this game has a 1-point spread and everybody's projections just project everybody in this game to play full minutes. You can still get some positive correlation there just because like the game ends up being higher scoring than expected, but there's nothing you can really do for the minutes outside of, if it goes to overtime. But in a game that has, a double-digit spread where maybe the projections everybody's using shave 2 minutes off of all of the starters, if the game is competitive, you're getting those extra 2 minutes added on in regulation. So games like this are just always a little bit more appealing if you are going to go particularly to the underdog to have some pieces from the other side. Speaking of the other side, 18% projected ownership coming in to Aaron Holiday, 16% to Alperen Şengün, and then 5 to 10% to Reed Shepherd, Kevin Durant, Amen Thompson, Jabari Smith. No ownership going anywhere else. Aaron Holiday, from a point per dollar standpoint, is fine. We have him projected for 26 minutes, 17 fantasy points, $3,600 price tag. If he's going to be one of the punt value plays that everybody wants to go to, there are other spots you can get to. One that I think will be interesting to target is the Minnesota game. There's a lot of uncertainty, I think, around exactly what Minnesota is going to do, both in terms of their starting lineup and rotationally, with Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert both out tonight. And Mike Conley is not getting much ownership. Not that I think Mike Conley is like a great DFS play, but neither is Aaron Holiday. So I do think that kind of waiting and trying to get some more certainty for Minnesota. These games actually start at the same time, so it's not even like you have to late swap. But Minnesota is a spot that maybe I would like to target, or you can target, if you're trying to get away from some Aaron Holiday. But point per dollar wise, he is fine. It's also 20% owned Aaron Holiday at $3,600 on a slate where you do actually have cheap pieces. You have different position, but Misi is $300 less, for example. As a value piece that I was getting some more of. Bruce Brown is $500 more. I don't love Bruce Brown, but he's getting like a quarter of the ownership of Aaron Holiday, and I certainly don't love Aaron Holiday either. So that is a spot where I have about half the field. I have 9%. He's projected for 18. I'm over the field on Şengün. I have 26% of him. Fields at about 16, 17%. Similarly, I'm over on Durant. I'm over on Amen Thompson. I'm over on Jabari Smith. Basically 2x on all of the good pieces from Houston, and I am fine with that. You can run it back with an Ayo Dosunmu or any Chicago piece if you want to, but you also don't have to, because you are talking about the team that's the sizable favorite that has the appealing matchup against the Bulls. Chicago so far this season, third in pace. Chicago is in the bottom 10 in adjusted defensive rating. You can get a blowout potentially where all of the Houston guys still do well. Like, they don't have to bring a Chicago guy along with them because they're just so good on a per minute basis that it ends up not mattering that they lose a couple of minutes. So not to say that you can't, obviously, again, game stacking is solid. It's good anyway. But it's a bigger priority for me if I'm playing the Chicago piece than if I have a Houston piece in my lineup, if that makes sense. But I just like getting to any of these guys. There's not much ownership coming in. The matchup's really good. And these are all, good point per minute guys. Amen Thompson, 1.07 DraftKings points per minute this year. Durant, 1.15. Şengün, 1.4. Jabari Smith, 0.85 is, the weakest of the group. So I do like getting to the main pieces from the Rockets at relatively low ownership quite a bit. San Antonio taking on OKC. Thunder, about 8-point favorites, about a 119 total. San Antonio coming in at about 111 for San Antonio. Nobody is questionable. Devin Vassell remains out. Nobody else that matters is on the injury report. For OKC, Hartenstein is out. Nobody else that matters is on the injury report. So a relatively healthy game here. As a result, 6% projected ownership to Julian Champagnie is the high mark amongst the San Antonio Spurs, followed by 4% to Wemby, De'Aaron Fox, Harrison Barnes, Castle. So just not much ownership to the Spurs. If you want to mix them in as contrarian plays, perfectly fine in tournaments. Like, obviously, Wembanyama can just win you a slate. Harrison Barnes at 4,200 can certainly be the best 4K player. But from a priority standpoint, there's nothing that really stands out here. I have 6% Barnes, 5% Champagnie, 4% Fox, 3% Wemby. And so pretty much, just in line with the field there. We did get Wemby back in the starting lineup in San Antonio's last game against Minnesota. He played 27 minutes in that one. So you still didn't get like a full starter's workload, but you did get an uptick by a couple of minutes. And that's really what I expect when he's in the starting lineup for now, that you live in like that 27, 28 minute range. 9,500. The one thing that is interesting about Wemby from a tournament standpoint is the Spurs may not tell us before they increase his minutes limit. And so there is, some chance that you just you kind of get blindsided by like a 32-minute Wemby game. And whenever you do get a 30-plus minute Wemby game at 9,500, he's going to be arguably the best play on the entire slate. So that is probably the strongest argument in favor of Wemby, is that you're seeing the price just drop as a result of him coming off the bench and being on a minutes limit for a while. And there is some chance that the Spurs don't tell us ahead of time, like, oh yeah, by the way, Wemby's going to play starter minutes now. So that would be kind of the strongest argument, I think, for Wemby. Is I would certainly like to be there on 4% owned Wemby if he randomly plays 31 minutes. But obviously that's not the most likely outcome. Chris in chat said, thoughts on stacking Denver and Pels? I think it's perfectly fine. It's a game with a close spread. Like, stacking any game is pretty much always fine because you have correlation within the game. The only reason that I singled out the Chicago-Houston game was that kind of necessarily, if especially if multiple pieces on Chicago have a big game, it would like directly increase the projection just because of the minutes projection on Houston. Whereas Denver Pels, it's a 1-point spread, or even it might be even tighter than that. Nobody is like, or most sites aren't factoring in blowout run at all. They actually should be, and I think we are, at least to some extent. But it's certainly factored in less than in a game that has an 11 plus point spread. But yeah, stacking Denver Pels certainly good and fine. Moving over to the OKC side, not a ton of ownership coming in here either. A little bit more than you are getting on the Spurs. For OKC, 14% projected ownership coming into $7,600 Chet Holmgren, 13% coming in to $3,500 shooting guard small forward eligible Alex Caruso. Shea is getting 7%. Jalen Williams getting 6%. Everybody else is less than that. I'm getting to about 10% of Chet. I don't have any Alex Caruso here. I think at 3,500, like it's fine. But there's enough other cheap pieces that I can mix in that are lower owned right now. So that's a piece where maybe I have a little bit more, as we get closer to lock. It's certainly not a spot that I feel like super strongly about not having him. But at the same time, we have him projected for like 17 minutes right now. If 17 minutes of Alex Caruso is going to be 10 to 15% owned, I think I can just find other spots to get to. I think there's a pretty good chance that ownership just ends up coming down. I am getting over the field on SGA. I have 17%. He's obviously really good. If you can get to him, 10,300 is a reasonable price tag. It is ownership dependent. Like, I think the biggest draw to getting to him, the biggest reason I have him is that he is getting only getting 7% ownership. So kind of like with Booker and Tyler Hero, just getting around, 2x the field on him. Absolute Power in chat said Sadiq Bey upgraded to probable. Thanks for that. That's good to know. So that's one less headache potentially that we have to deal with around lock. Minnesota taking on Milwaukee to wrap this one up. And this one is very, very difficult to talk about in terms of specifics. I think it's interesting to talk about in terms of there's a lot of ways that this could go and a lot of, I think, different ways that you can approach it. So Bones Highland has started the last 3 games that Anthony Edwards was out. Bones Highland started the game, but Mike Conley was also out. So you could get Bones Highland starting here, but you could get Mike Conley starting. You could get Jalen Clark starting if they want to just put DiVincenzo on ball and add a good defender to the starting lineup. You could get Dillingham starting. I think that's probably the least likely out of the 4, but we will learn more when we get a Minnesota starting lineup. Also, though, you have Rudy Gobert out. So my assumption is that Naz Reid is going to replace Gobert in the starting lineup, and then somebody is going to replace Edwards, whether that's Conley, Highland, Clark, somebody else remains to be seen. All these guys are super cheap. The potential Anthony Edwards replacements are all super cheap. Highland's 3,100, Conley's 3K, Dillingham's 3K, Clark is 3,200, shooting guard, small forward. Leonard Miller is 3K. So that's really up in the air. What I do think is important is kind of to know how to react to who starts and kind of have expectations for what the rotation looks like. So if Mike Conley starts, he is only 3K. Right now, he's projected for 5% ownership. He's in like half my lineups right now. But that just has a ton to do with the ownership. Like if Mike Conley starts, I assume he ends up actually being like, 15% owned or something like that. And my interest in him, it'll still be there because he's a 3K starter that potentially plays 28 minutes. But it'll come down some just because of the ownership. Bones Highland, if he starts, it's a very, very good sign for Bones Highland's minutes because it's just Minnesota telling you out of the gate, we're giving Bones Highland the first chance to play well and to not suck. And, we're looking to Bones Highland to replace some of the offense that we're losing from Anthony Edwards being out. Now, granted, Naz Reid replacing Rudy Gobert does pick up some of that offense. Like Naz Reid is obviously more versatile, higher usage offensive player than Rudy Gobert. And then some of that offense, of course, will go to Julius Randle. You're going to have Julius Randle running the offense more. Some of it will go to Dante DiVincenzo. So whichever of these cheap guys does move into the starting lineup, it's not like they are being tasked with being Anthony Edwards. But Bones Highland is a higher usage offensive player than Mike Conley. Bones Highland this year about 20% usage rate. Mike Conley about 12. Conley 0.72 DraftKings points per minute. Bones Highland 1 fantasy point per minute. Jalen Clark is more similar to Mike Conley. He's in there for defensive reasons. 0.7 DraftKings points per minute, 13.5% usage rate. Of note, by the way, Terrence Shannon is also out. So that is one guard that cannot throw a wrench in anything tonight. So basically the way that I'm thinking about this is whoever starts, it's good for their minutes projection, right? Like if Mike Conley starts, it's like, okay, we can add a couple minutes onto the Mike Conley projection. If Bones Highland starts, okay, we can add a couple minutes onto Bones Highland. Amongst the non-starters, I am most inclined, there's two things that I generally will look for. One, is there somebody that just isn't getting any ownership? And two, who is good point per minute? Because you don't need to get it's easier to get lucky essentially when you play the good point per minute guy. And then if that guy also happens to get the most minutes, then you're in a really good spot. Yesterday was a really good example of that with Boston. You got the starting lineup where Baylor Shireman was in the starting lineup. So you had Hugo Gonzalez coming off the bench and you had Jordan Walsh coming off the bench. The way I handled that was I swapped basically all of my Hugo Gonzalez to Baylor Shireman because they were basically the same play. They're this like shitty 0.7 fantasy point per minute guy that maybe gets more minutes because they're in the starting lineup and they're really cheap. I kept my Jordan Walsh because Jordan Walsh is a good point per minute guy, and I just need him to find a way to stay on the floor, which he ultimately did. It won me the $5 tournament last night for $5K. He was like 2% owned. I played him in one of my $555 entries too at 1%. That was, the one entry there I cashed. But that was kind of the thinking. It wasn't, I really liked Jordan Walsh, but it was, I'm fine taking somewhat of a stand on Jordan Walsh at low ownership because he's at least a good point per minute guy. If he happens to get minutes, he's probably going to pay off his salary pretty easily. So it's the same kind of thing here where, like, if Bones Highland starts, obviously he's great. Everybody's going to play him. You should too. If they start Mike Conley, then yeah, the minutes projection goes up. You can play Conley, but like he's still not a good point per minute guy. And Bones Highland off the bench is still going to be appealing. The difference, though, is that so from a point per minute standpoint, Bones Highland is basically last night's Jordan Walsh. The difference is everybody's going to play Bones Highland regardless, probably. Obviously, the ownership will come down if he's not starting. But let's say you get like Jalen Clark in the starting lineup. And so you get a starting lineup of like DiVincenzo, Jalen Clark, McDaniels, Randall, and Reed. What ends up happening there is Jalen Clark's ownership will come up a bit because he's starting. He's 3,200. He's shooting guard, small forward. He's not a good point per minute guy, so he's not exciting to click on. But he's sort of like an Aaron Holiday type guy. But then amongst the bench pieces, you're going to have still quite a bit more ownership coming into Bones Highland than Mike Conley. Mike Conley's been playing ahead of Bones Highland in their rotation. They're playing similar minutes. Mike Conley's been subbing in first. So I would still want to play a good amount of Bones Highland, but it would still open the door to get contrarian with some Mike Conley and just hope that maybe like he ends up in the closing lineup for one reason or another and gets to like 24 minutes. And if he does end up in the closing lineup, it probably means he's producing fantasy points. So the backcourt here, the spot filling in for Anthony Edwards is really messy. The other thing to keep in mind, Gobert being out actually does have an impact on those minutes, though. Basically, like trickle down minutes for the guards, because Naz Reid is the backup center and the backup 4 on this team. You take out Rudy Gobert, Naz Reid has to play all the center minutes, like all of his minutes at center. You're probably going to get Julius Randle as the backup center. Yohan Berenger probably picks up a handful of minutes, but I don't expect him to like be a true backup center here, most likely. So you have Randle now probably playing backup center minutes, which, by the way, is good for Julius Randle. You have McDaniels playing backup 4 minutes. You need Jalen Clark to pick up like backup 3 minutes. And it opens up minutes for, some combination of Conley, Highland, Dillingham. I would say I would probably add, I don't know, 22. If Conley is starting, I would say 22, 23 minutes for Highland makes sense. Maybe 25-ish for Conley makes sense. The Dillingham projection here could be a little bit high. If Berenger plays 7 minutes instead of 3, then maybe you're talking 14 minutes instead of 18 for Dillingham. But Dillingham could play 18 minutes, and he is a 0.9 fantasy point per minute guy. So there is uncertainty there. He's getting 3% ownership. I have 4%. Basically, this is a very, very long-winded way of saying I don't know what the hell is going to happen as far as the starting lineup goes, but there are different ways that you can think about this and attack this. Samson said, first-time listener, glad you're here. Hopefully you come back. Ricky said, I absolutely love your take on Wemby. If I may add, they're going to play this game tight because of the rivalry from the Cup, so I could see a chance where Wemby gets 30-31. I agree with that, but also I think you have to keep in mind the massive overarching thing for the Spurs is going to be Wemby's health. They're not going to be short-sighted enough to, just wake up on January 13th and say, fuck it, we really want to beat the Thunder. Go, play a bunch of minutes. But to your point, if they were looking and they're like, yeah, within the next game or two, we want to get Wemby to 31, then yeah, maybe they just say, all right, let's do it against the Thunder. So I do agree, but I do think it's important to keep in mind, the Spurs' priorities are still keeping Wemby healthy. But yeah, a matchup against OKC certainly doesn't hurt. Chris said, instead of Holiday, and if Conley starts, would you play both of them instead of Holiday, seeing as that both may get decent minutes at the guard spot? This is to pay up for other spots, of course. I assume you're asking if you can play Conley and Highland together. I assume you might be asking about Conley and Holiday, but I think it's Conley and Highland, because you said instead of Holiday. Yeah, I think you can play them both together because they're so cheap and because it's only a 5-game slate. In a perfect world, you probably, would do something like either Conley or Highland and then pair them with, a Misi or a Holiday or whatever, especially in the $5 mega field, because you're if Mike Conley actually scores, just to throw a number out, let's say Mike Conley scored 40 fantasy points. Bones Highland probably didn't play all that much because Mike Conley needed to play a ton. But assuming that, doesn't happen, you can get, let's say Mike Conley plays 26 minutes. Mike Conley gives you 24 fantasy points. There's a lot of ways the slate plays out where you're happy with that at 3K. And Bones Highland plays 22 minutes and Bones Highland scores 25 fantasy points. You're happy with that. And there's a lot of ways it can play out where you would want both of them. So yes, I do think you can play them together. I would be more in you should be more averse to it the more people you're competing against. But either way, I think that it's fine. If Highland is starting, I think he's just clearly far and away better because he's the better point per minute guy, and that's a signal that he gets more minutes. So beyond all of that, which again, it's a lot of moving pieces, it's a lot of looking and seeing where ownership actually ends up settling on these guys. Beyond all of that, the Minnesota guys are good also. Naz Reid getting 66% ownership. I have 77%. 1.12 DraftKings points per minute, and he's going to get more minutes. We might actually be a little bit low on his 32-minute projection right now, by the way. He started 17 games last year. He averaged 34.7 minutes per game. I think 32 minutes is fine for a projection, but I think there's actually a pretty good chance he plays a little bit more as long as he's able to avoid foul trouble and that type of stuff. Julius Randle getting 36% ownership. I have 43%. I mentioned it a minute ago, but already a good fantasy producer, 1.26 DraftKings points per minute for the season. But you take Rudy Gobert off the floor, you probably have Julius Randle, staggering with Naz Reid and getting more rebounding opportunities. You take Anthony Edwards off the floor, you can get more usage, but also more playmaking. Anthony Edwards has an 18% usage rate this year. Julius Randle, 26% without Anthony Edwards on the floor. Dante DiVincenzo is a fantasy point per minute guy without Edwards. He's getting 19% ownership. I have 14. Jaden McDaniels, 0.9 DraftKings points per minute without Edwards. I think he's really interesting. He's only getting 16% ownership. He's 5,800. So he's somebody I think you can use as that kind of like Dylan Brooks, Aaron Gordon pivot where Aaron Gordon certainly projects better than Jaden McDaniels, but you could potentially get a game where Jaden McDaniels plays like 38, 39 minutes if he can stay out of foul trouble. And he's a good enough point per minute guy. So I'm 2x the field on McDaniels right now. I like him quite a bit as a way, if he continues to be projected for like half the ownership of somebody like Brooks or even Gordon, as just a way to be different, because there is a path to him playing a lot of minutes, given that both Edwards and Gobert are out. Ricky said if Conley starts, I see him 19 to 20 minutes and Bones gets the rest. If Bones starts, Conley probably gets 17 and Bones gets the rest. Maybe. I don't think if Conley starts, it's not a foregone conclusion that Bones is playing like 20. You said the rest. I certainly wouldn't project like the rest of 48 minutes to go to Conley, or to go to Bones rather, because I think Dillingham is in the rotation somewhere. But the potential problem is that for Bones, if he comes off the bench, is if Minnesota is playing from behind down the stretch, you could see more Bones because they need more scoring and he's, their best bet at it. If the game though is like, tied roughly, or Minnesota's playing from ahead, Jalen Clark can be out there for defensive purposes. Conley potentially for defensive purposes. And you could get, let's say they're playing from ahead, you can very easily get that closing lineup of DiVincenzo, Clark, McDaniels, Randall, Reed. So a lot for Bones Highland, like the closing lineup in general is going to be determined by who's playing well and what the score in the game is. But if Bones Highland isn't starting, he just becomes that much riskier because he could end up playing the game where he plays 20 minutes because Mike Conley starts, Mike Conley plays well, and then Bones isn't in the closing lineup because they're playing from ahead. So it just like kind of adds to the risk element. But still, ultimately, it comes down to paying attention to ownership, and Highland would still project as a good point per dollar play, even if he's coming off the bench. Milwaukee on the other side, 37% projected ownership coming into Giannis Antetokounmpo. 14% to Porter, 12% to Rollins, 6% to Miles Turner. I didn't actually mention the injury report here, but Miles Turner is questionable. If he's out, things look better for Bobby Portis. Things look better potentially for a 3K Jericho Sims. He is only center eligible, though. Right now, I'm only getting 15% Giannis. This has a lot to do with I was actually wondering, I was trying to figure out where I was taking ownership from. This is really just it's not that Giannis is a bad play or anything close to it. It's just a matter of how my player exposures look right now. If you're going to be over the field like I am on Devin Booker and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Tyler Hero, while not, sacrificing Jamal Murray or Naz Reid, it's going to cost you something. And for me, it's basically, I'm playing very similar amounts of Giannis, SGA, Booker, Hero. But really, I think Booker, Giannis, SGA, that's kind of driving why I'm under the field on Giannis. It doesn't really actually have anything to do with Giannis. You do lose Rudy Gobert's rim protection. Minnesota is, still in general a good defensive team. But how much Giannis I get to will be in large part determined by what I'm doing with, Booker and SGA and Wemby and those other pieces that are lower owned. Also, Jamal Murray, if he gets ruled out, it just opens up even more value. It makes it even easier to get to Giannis. But if Murray is in, then getting to Murray is a priority. Kevin Porter, I have 11%. I think he looks fine. I'm under the field on Ryan Rollins. Again, that probably just has to do with getting to some of those other guards. Miles Turner getting a little bit of ownership. I have a little bit as well. So a lot of moving pieces today, but hopefully that gets you started. Hopefully you feel like you're in a good place going into the rest of the day. Reminder, link to our free Discord is in the description. Our projections are also live. Use the promo code RTSNBA. Get 20% off your first payment. So if you sign up for annual, it's 20% off and you're good for the next 365 days. If you sign up for monthly, use promo code RTSNBA. It gets you 20% off your first month. We also have Draft Caddy. If you're somebody that plays like Underdog, you can overlay our projections directly onto your Underdog draft using the Draft Caddy. We have that option as well. Thank you for checking out the show. Good luck on your lineups tonight. See you back here again tomorrow.